Good afternoon, District 5, and welcome to the District 5 Town Hall. My name is Dean Alsop, my pronouns are he, him, and I am the District Director for Councilmember Juarez, who represents District 5, which includes the Bitter Lake, Aurora, Lake City, Pinehurst, Victory Heights, and Northgate, Broadview, and Haller Lake neighborhoods. Before I introduce the council member, I'd like to give folks watching an understanding of the nuts and bolts of today's town hall. We currently have over 70 people who have RSVP'd. We will start the town hall by receiving some opening remarks from Councilmember Juarez, followed by a brief presentation of the city's 2021 budget from City Budget Director Ben Noble, followed by presentations from the Community Police Commission, Commissioner Esther Lucero, and Ryan Gilbert of the Seattle Indian Health Board, and finally, a chance to discuss the homelessness response of the city from Human Services Director Jason Johnson. After each presentation, viewers will have 15 minutes to ask questions and provide feedback for the presenters. Our focus of this town hall are the three most important issues facing District 5, the 2021 budget, community safety, and homelessness. You can submit your questions by clicking on the link you received in an email after you RSVP'd to today's event. I will direct these questions to our presenters or to Councilmember Juarez. Given the time restraints, we will not be able to answer all questions, but our office is happy to follow up offline in order to get those answered for you. And without further delay, I'd like to present Seattle City Council Member Debora Juarez.
Thank you, Dean. It's good to see everybody. I know it's been a while since I've been on camera, but I'm glad to be here. And I hope that, and this will be the beginning of many virtual town hall meetings that we have. So again, thank you for attending our virtual town hall meeting. I'm now in my second term in which I've represented District 5 and of course the whole city of Seattle since 2016. On the council, I serve as chair of the Public Assets and Native Communities Committee, which also includes Department of Parks and Rec, Woodland Park Zoo, the Aquarium, Office of the Waterfront, Seattle Center, and Seattle Public Libraries. I also serve on the Sound Transit Board. As you know, the Sound Transit Board is 3 counties, Snohomish, King, and Pierce. And we've been diligently working on the realignment, on the light rail stations that are coming into the city of Seattle. And for me and for us in D5, light rail at Northgate and 130th. I also serve, and I am the chair of the Metropolitan Park District. The Metropolitan Park District is one of the 3 main funding sources for the Seattle Parks Department. Our first meeting as a board will be Monday, October 19th at 5:30. Public comment and public hearing sign up starts at 3:30. The agenda will begin with the presentation by Superintendent Jesus Aguirre on the 2021 proposal. Then we will take up 2 resolutions that allow the MPD board to delay the strategic planning process for the next 6-year cycle. And we hope we're going to have to probably, unfortunately, delay that until next spring of 2021. Finally, we will open up to the public hearing on the 2021, the proposed Metropolitan Park District budget, which we've been working with Director Noble on as well. Earlier this year, we celebrated the opening of the Lakefront Community House, a 24/7 enhanced shelter in the Bitter Lake neighborhood. More recently, my office has celebrated Indigenous Peoples Day, which was Monday. And on Friday, we celebrated the honorary renaming of 28th Avenue Northeast to Hayashi Avenue to remember the Hayashi family who are integral members of the Lake City community before they were incarcerated during World War II. Big shout out to all the folks that made that happen. It was a wonderful event and we had a huge turnout, including the consulate from Japan. Looking forward, we got some exciting projects on deck. The Office of Housing will construct 600 new units of permanent supportive housing in 6 buildings. 496 of these units will be in the North End. 291 of those units will be in District 5 in the Lake City, Bitter Lake, and Greenwood neighborhoods. One of these buildings, the Sacred Medicine House in Lake City, should offer 125 units of permanent supportive housing and could be up and running in as little as 18 months. And as I shared earlier, light rail's coming. Light rail comes to Northgate in 2021, and 130th and 145th Street stations are in the planning. We've been meeting with community, particularly on the 130th stop. We will find out if we can open the 130th Street station earlier by mid-2021. In addition, the City of Seattle is partnering with the Seattle Housing Authority to build mixed income, mixed use, affordable housing at Northgate. That is commonly known as the Northgate Commons. And it will be similar to what the City of Seattle did in partnership with the Seattle Housing Authority at Yesler Terrace. This has been a project in the making for a while, and I want to thank the executive and all the folks at HSD and Housing. They've been working with us on this. Next, as you probably heard today, I will serve in an ex officio role for the Equitable Communities Initiative, the ECI Task Force, as we work with communities to invest $100 million in what we have deemed BIPOC communities. That is Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. And we'll have more on that later. There are three main issues that we want to address today, which we've been getting not only obviously from your letters, your phone calls, starting with the budget. Well, Director Noble is here, community safety, and homelessness. At this very moment, our city is grappling with a trifecta we have never seen before. A recession fueled by a pandemic, disease, and a civil rights reckoning. And I know you've heard this over and over again, and I can't emphasize it more. Never in our country's history have we dealt with a worldwide pandemic, a depression, if you will, and this type of social unrest. This is the context in which you have started the budget proceedings with a $315 million revenue shortfall. Dr. Noble will go more into that in a bit. The mayor has since transmitted her budget to the council, and it is our job to review, receive community input, and make amendments as we see fit. The Washington state law requires our city budget to be balanced. Our final vote on the 2021 budget will be November 23rd. Community safety. This summer, thousands of Seattleites, including myself, took to the streets to demand justice for George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others who were murdered by police officers. During the budget process, the council will be reimagining our public safety system. I've been supportive of reallocating resources from the police department to BIPOC communities. We need a plan of action and ensure that public safety is not jeopardized as we make these landmark changes. And I'm guessing sweeping they shall be. It cannot be done in one budget cycle, however, but rather will be an ongoing process, a process I look forward to, hopefully to be the first city to actually take that step forward to reimagining what community policing is. I believe that the city council and the mayor are ready to do this hard, difficult, and much needed work. Homelessness. On the outset of COVID-19 pandemic, we immediately lost 50% of our shelter capacity in order to provide appropriate distance between our unsheltered neighbors. Additionally, the CDC guidelines have recommended our city cease any encampment removals. More people are now homeless due to a direct result of losing a job and other issues to COVID. As we are all aware of the encampments across the city and obviously in District 5, I want you to know that we will continue to work with the city. We will continue with our efforts to monitor these encampments. My staff meets with the navigation team. My staff met with the navigation team twice a month and has met with residents of these encampments on 2 separate occasions. Since April, the navigation team has visited Albert Davis and the Lake City Mini Park 67 times to provide water, meals, referrals to shelter, to clean up litter and needles, and clean the hygiene facilities. And that's including parks coming in and emptying the garbage, cleaning up the porta potties, and providing the hand washing stations. The navigation team has been to Nesbitt Avenue a total of 51 times, and the Bitter Lake Community Center 11 times. I have been a consistent supporter of the navigation team, and I voted against the disbandment for many reasons. Mainly is before we deconstructed the NAV team, I wanted something in its place. And I believe in a city-led response to homelessness on city property. And I'm hoping in the next 2-3 months, we can make that happen. My office recently met with the new captain of the North Precinct, Captain Brian Stample. I look forward to working with Captain Stample as we respond to the safety concerns and other important issues across our great city. Because of the realities of working during a pandemic and my own vulnerabilities to this virus, we've been unable to continue our District 5 meetings in our District 5 office on the North Seattle campus. Many of you have visited us there. We still have the office and we still try to have somebody in there on Fridays, but as you know, we haven't been able to allow the public to come in to have person-to-person meetings. But we are meeting with people virtually. So please continue to contact our office and work with our staff to have these virtual meetings. And I'm going to plug here. Please sign up for our newsletter, The North Star, which we send out weekly. This has been actually really successful. This has been one of our main tools to getting out to community. I think we have a readership up to maybe 6,000 now, including tribal communities, which is great because we hear from a lot of folks about not just Seattle issues and homelessness issues and tribal organization issues, but all kinds of community issues across the city. And so we're always looking for people to work with us. And if they want to provide the community to hear about their group or something that they might want to write about or something that they might be interested in us looking into. I'm going to do a big shout out here. I want to thank our supporters at the Refugee Artesian Initiative in Lake City Way. That's called the RAI. President and founder Ming Ming and board director Brittany are amazing. Ming Ming started the Refugee Artesian Initiative in 2016 with a stated mission to transform the lives of refugee and immigrant women by providing sustainable work in sewing and handcrafting products. I visited their crafting space. I've been there about 3 times, but just this last Friday. And during our visit, Brittany and Ming Ming gave me a few masks, vote masks, to remind people that it's so important to vote. You can go and get these masks. They're really cool. The RAI is located at 125th. It's actually 1245 Lake City Way, right next to Chris Lefferson's shop. Let's build Lake City together. We grab this. Can you see it? Is it backwards? This is a great mask. The first time I wore it, I got 8 compliments at QFC. So get the mask and wear it. So my script says, I'm trying to look at this. I'm smiling to myself because there's a lot more. There's so much more I want to share, but I got to let these other folks talk. So let me just say this. I'd like to introduce and welcome our esteemed guests joining us today at Town Hall. First, we will hear from City Budget Director, Dr. Ben Noble, the keystone of our city's budget. After Director Noble, we will transition to a conversation about community safety and hear from Esther Lucero, my friend and sister, CEO of the Seattle Indian Health Board, and who is also a member of the Community Police Commission. Finally, we will end the town hall with the Director of Human Services, Jason Johnson, who will tell us about the city's plans for addressing homelessness in 2021. I think if I missed something, Dean would holler at me, so I think we're good. So with that, Dean, I'll let you take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Juarez. We are now going to shift to our first presentation. City Budget Director Ben Noble, Director, our IT staff should have given you the permission to share your screen. And with that, I will say the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am going to put up a slide deck and walk you through some basic information about the city's budget and then be available for some questions. The format of this presentation is that I'm going to start with just a little bit of kind of budget 101 about the city's finances, just to give you a sense of how the budget works, and then talk a little bit about this year, 2020, and then more about 2021. So overall, the city's budget is about $6 billion, almost $6.5 billion. But that's not all funding that goes to kind of the city services that you might think of, like police and fire and libraries and parks. A big chunk of that is the city's utilities. And that's this table kind of highlights the major components of the budget. The first one is the general fund. That is, in fact, a primary source of funding for police and fire and parks and the like. And I'll talk a whole bunch about that. But I do want to recognize that the city's budget includes almost $1.5 billion each for Seattle Public Utilities. That's your water, your sewer, your garbage, and also for Seattle City Light, which is your electricity. Those monies are, they're contained within those two institutions. The monies that we collect from users, so the rates you pay, those can't be used for anything else except to provide those services. So they're in the city's budget, but they're very, very targeted. SDOT, the Seattle Department of Transportation, also receives a large amount of money. A lot of that is from dedicated revenue sources, things like the commercial parking tax or a share of the state's motor fuel tax, gas tax. And again, those things can only be used for transportation. We also get a fair amount of grant funding from the federal and state government as well. There are then other elements of the budget that are restricted. For instance, the Department of Construction and Inspections that does all the permitting work in the city. It's another separate institution financially. The money that you pay for a permit stays within that operation to help pay for the staff who work through those permits, but we can't use that money for other things in the budget. And then the last component here, and we'll talk some more about this as well, is that there's $300 million that comes from voter-approved levies and from the Metropolitan Park District, which was also approved by the voters. We have a transportation levy that provides money for transportation. We have parks, the Parks District. We have the library levy, housing levy, and education levy. And those are all dedicated sources that can only be used for the purposes that were authorized by the public. But the budget allocates all of that money. And this year, again, north of $6 billion. I do want to talk a fair amount about the general fund. That's where there's the most flexible choices to be made about how city resources are allocated and what they're spent on. And I wanted to give you a sense of what that spending looks like now. Currently, almost half of the general fund, again, this most flexible part of the city's budget, goes for public safety. So principally the police department and the fire department. There's also a certain amount that goes to the municipal court and to the city attorney's office. But the police budget is about $400 million. The fire budget, well north of $200 million. And it gives you a sense that those are some ways the most fundamental city services, and they accordingly take up the biggest part of our budget. We also spend a fair amount on arts, culture, and recreation. That is principally the Parks Department. And also the library system. We fund those significantly, although they each also have other funding sources. Health and Human Services, that's the Human Services Department. Again, a significant amount of the general fund goes there, almost $150 million at 10%. But actually we receive additional money from both the state and federal government in support of human services. So, and I should note that there is a piece here that's labeled administration, and I probably do myself no favors without telling you more about what's there, because it's not just overhead. That includes some of our more important offices, but maybe some smaller ones, like the Office for Civil Rights, the Office of Labor Standards, Office for Sustainability and the Environment. But it also includes our IT functions, our technology functions, and our labor functions as well. So that's where your money gets spent. What's COVID done to all of this? Bottom line is it's made it all a lot harder. This is a page that's covered in numbers, but I wanted a couple things to highlight here. So these are all the revenue sources listed here are the revenue sources that go into the general fund, to the most flexible sources. And it gives you a sense of how big the relative components are. Property tax is a big piece, sales tax, B&O tax, that's our business tax, and then also utility taxes, and then a number of other things. So you get a sense of kind of the relative contribution. But what this also shows is how much our revenues have fallen in 2020 and that we're projecting them to fall. So we're seeing really significant decreases in the sales tax. in the B&O tax, less so, but also in the utility taxes, court fines, and in parking. Parking meters were off for multiple months, have only just now turned on and at relatively low rates. But the bottom line, just highlighted with this arrow, is that we saw, and we're going to see a $200 million drop in revenues. So more than 10%, not quite 20 of the general fund. And that's forced a lot of difficult choices. In terms of 2020, this is what we've done to essentially to rebalance the budget, recognizing that $200 million in lost revenues. All city departments have reduced their spending. We've done an across the board hiring freeze. We do have a waiver process for critical functions, but we've reduced hiring, reduced discretionary spending on travel and training and the like. We've reprioritized a lot of what had been planned capital spending and shifted the capital dollars into operations. We can defer capital projects and pick them up in future years, but critical operations need to be supported now. And those operations have both been kind of the base functions of the city, but also stepping up to COVID. So the Seattle Center, as an example, not hosting cultural events, but is operating temporary shelter as we work to create a shelter system that can deal with the realities of COVID. The Parks Department similarly has turned over some of its facilities, not just for shelters, but also to provide childcare to folks who are at work. So we've reprioritized in a number of ways. The city has actually set up and funded testing sites. We're seeking reimbursement for the federal government for a good share of those costs. But again, an example of how we've redeployed. We are also relying on our reserves. We started the year with about $128 million in reserves. And between this year and next, we expect to actually use all of those to help mitigate the impacts. And then we've been very aggressive in seeking federal money and assistance otherwise. Shifting to talk about 2021, excuse me, just a little bit about process. We spend most of the year developing the budget. I start, start up in March. That was delayed this year somewhat by COVID as we were scrambling with the current budget, never mind next year's 2021 budget. But we then submit that to the council at the end of September. That was done a couple of weeks ago. And the council is now in its review process, as Councilmember Juarez has indicated. The council will make final decisions and adopt the budget in late November, right ahead of Thanksgiving, and it'll take effect in 2021. So I just want to give you a sense of that timeline and how long we've been at this, and now we've entered what I call the council phase, if you will. To talk more about 2021, think about the underlying economic conditions are really the key driver, and also COVID itself. So I have joked that instead of economists doing revenue forecasts, we need epidemiologists in order to tell us where we think COVID is going. And the truth is, none of us really know. But we fully anticipate to be operating under COVID constraints through mid-year next year. So that will affect the city facilities that can be operated. It'll also affect where city employees, like everybody else, where we work. The economic impacts have been dramatic. We are starting to see recovery, but we anticipate that it's going to be a slow, if not steady recovery, and don't expect full recovery until 2023 or more likely 2024. One good news piece of good news in all of this is that this past summer, the city council adopted a new revenue stream that's expected to generate approximately $200 million going forward, starting in 2021. And that will go a long way to mitigating the impacts, the revenue losses that I described above. One of the challenges is that the hope had been to use that money to invest in a number of other priorities. And that will be a challenge now because our base revenues have been hit so hard. But that gives you a sense of the climate we're in. It's a difficult one, and we're expecting slow recovery, but we are beginning to see recovery. In building the 2021 budget, the mayor had a number of priorities, one of which was sustaining our work in helping mitigate the impacts of COVID. That's both helping mitigate the spread of the disease and then financial and other assistance for those who have suffered the most. So we have money in 2021 to continue our testing sites. We have money to provide grocery vouchers on an ongoing basis for a significant number of folks, to provide rent relief, to continue to operate the shelter system in a way that is sensitive to the risks created by COVID, to decrease the density of the shelter system as an example. As Councilmember Juarez mentioned, she's now going to serve on the task force that's going to advise on the investments of $100 million for BIPOC communities. So the mayor's budget, even in these difficult times, has set aside $100 million. The money is not currently programmed specifically and is waiting the recommendations of this task force. And at the same time, we've protected some existing resources that have sought to invest in BIPOC communities as well. We have something called the Equitable Development Initiative that we've been operating for multiple years, and the proposed budget sustains all the funding for that program. We have moved on public safety. I'll talk in the next slide, a couple slides about changes at the Seattle Police Department and elsewhere. We've also been preserving essential public services. So there are no meaningful cuts in the services provided by the likes of the fire department or the human services department. So we've been sensitive to the needs of those who are under stress now. We're continuing to expand efforts around homelessness. There's increased funding for more homeless units, more housing units for folks who are experiencing homelessness, and additional support services. And we've done all of this with a minimal impact on the city workforce. So we've tried to minimize layoffs. There are a number that are identified, approximately 30, so a relatively small number in the city's overall budget. We've been able to manage a lot of our costs through this hiring freeze and other efforts. Just to highlight some of the things that there is money for, I mentioned sustaining COVID relief. There's more than $20 million allocated as identified here. The homelessness supports continue. A significant amount of new funding to sustain the hygiene facilities and the mobile showers that we have set up as additional hygiene measures in the context of COVID and the homelessness situation. And as I mentioned, Parks Department is providing childcare. So these are just a sample of things that we're doing to sustain the COVID response and our funding for 2021. We hope for additional federal support, no matter what happens in November, but we haven't counted on it in building the budget because we can't. We mentioned the $100 million, so that is not yet allocated, but designed to have a public engagement process to identify where those resources should be spent. And the mayor is also looking for the task force to make recommendations on how to identify an ongoing funding source, so that this wouldn't be a one-time investment, but rather that to be ongoing funding to support investments in these communities. In terms of Seattle Police Department, obviously, there's been a lot of interest and a lot of focus on restructuring SPD. There are a number of things that are done in the budget. There is an overall reduction in staffing that saves about $20 million. In addition, there are a number of functions that are proposed to be transferred out. So the parking enforcement officers would move to SDOT. They obviously have an important function with respect to the transportation and the right of way. So SDOT feels like an appropriate place, but they don't need to be under the command and control of the police department necessarily. The 911 call center. So when you dial 911, one of the places that those calls goes is to a call center that is currently operated by SPD. We would set this up as a separate independent function. Similarly, the city's Office of Emergency Management, which coordinates response to all kinds of emergencies from big storms to COVID. That's currently bureaucratically within the police department. It's largely been operationally independent, but the budget will make that entirely independent. But the mayor is also interested, though, in looking at community safety more broadly than SPD and really thinking about community safety as something other than just the police. So we have an interdepartmental team that's been established to review the 911 calls and all of SPD's functions to identify things that don't require uniform response. We'll be engaging the public in that work as well. The municipal
It looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with Director Noble, and we are working as quickly as possible to get him back online. While we figure that out, I will go ahead and start some of the Q&A period, and then once Director Noble is back online, we can continue with his presentation. So in the meantime, I'd like to start by asking for Councilmember Juarez, if she wouldn't mind responding to a question from Carol in Olympic Hills. Oh, Director Noble, are you back with us?
Sorry, I just came back.
Great. Okay. Let's continue with your presentation. Thank you.
Cool. I am going to, do I need to share screen again?
I believe so.
Cool. I just can't see what I can't see. So. I'm just about to wrap up. So. All right. So we're talking about community safety. And then just in terms of how we balanced, we're going to continue to maintain vacancies. We've imposed a pay freeze on the professional staff of the city, particularly strategic managers and executives. Again, I talked about non-essential spending. We're deferring expenditures, managing vacancies, and then shifting again. So it's a lot of the same strategy we used in 2020, we're again using in 2021. So rather than go into details about individual department reductions, I thought it best just to take questions, and so I can address the interests of those who are participating.
Great. Thank you, Director Noble, for your presentation. I will give a quick update. Looks like we have over 40 questions and over 170 participants right now in our town hall. So just wanted to extend a welcome to those of you who have recently joined. And like Director Ben Noble said, this is a great time to start with some questions. And our first one is actually from Renee, and she is in the Pinehurst neighborhood. And Renee asks, I recently saw that the sidewalk on 30th Avenue Northeast between 145th and 125th is nearing completion. This is such an important improvement on this arterial that connects many lower income neighborhoods to grocery stores and other essential shops and services. Many who live along this arterial don't drive or own a car. Thank you to everyone who made this sidewalk happen. With budget cuts on the horizon, how will we prioritize pedestrian and bike safety infrastructure like this to make sure that it brings the biggest impact to the community? So Director Noble, if you could discuss more or less how the mayor's budget proposal addresses pedestrian and bike safety infrastructure for us.
Yeah, the reality is that among the departments that suffered the most financially is SDOT. So there is going to be less funding for a variety of infrastructure projects, and sidewalks are, I have to be honest, are included in those. And once we achieve the level of economic recovery, we'll move to restore funding. But I think the key then is about prioritizing and identifying projects and I know 130th, I don't know this project specifically, but that provide critical connections and the biggest bang for buck, if you will. And SDOT does have a thoughtful process about doing that kind of prioritization, and they also seek input from a variety of stakeholders to inform those decisions. So there will be less resource. The prioritization then becomes all the more important in terms of how to allocate the resources that are available.
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from Wendy, and Wendy lives in Little Brook. And Wendy asks, why does the mayor and city council believe swimming pools are so insignificant that they are failing to reopen 60% of pools in 2021? They are vital for teaching our children to swim and prevent drowning in a region with many bodies of water. They are essential for many seniors who have limited ability to exercise on land. They are important for people of all ages whose exercise of choice is the water. This service should not be regarded, this service should be regarded as essential and not cut. So Director Noble, again, if you could loop us into conversations around swimming pools in the area.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. Doesn't matter, but I'm a fan of swimming myself, use it for exercise. We are facing difficult choices and financial situation. So the reality about the pools is that they are among the more expensive facilities that Parks operates. So our goal is to strike a balance in operating some of the pools. So, but we don't think we'll be able to afford to operate all of them, even potentially post-COVID for the remainder of 21. That will depend a lot on how the public health part of this evolves, and also how, and because part of this will depend on the Parks Department's ability to open facilities overall and to restore some of its earned revenues. I call them earned revenues. There are a lot of fees and user charges that help parks with their budget. But bottom line is, it's a priority to try to get those facilities restored. They are among the most expensive to operate, so that is why they versus others were identified as things that if we have to make painful cuts, that those might be them. But it's none of this brings us any joy, obviously.
Thank you for that. Our next question is from Kathleen, and Kathleen lives in the Licton Springs neighborhood. And she is asking for an update on the funding for a feasibility study for the Aurora Licton Springs Community Center. And so I was going to ask Councilmember Juarez if you could provide us with an update on the status of this feasibility study, and you are currently muted.
Thank you. So this is not the Lake City one. This is the one up on, can you?
Yep. Yep, we have many new community centers that we want to put in District 5. This is for this is off of Aurora Licton
right.
Springs. Yeah.
So I also I can't remember who said it, but that was a really good question about the pools. I just want to add something to that before I get to the community center issue. Seattle Parks and Rec have Superintendent Agate has just really come through. Their employees, because of COVID, have had to be deployed to do other things, unfortunately. And the focus has been on community centers, using them for childcare and the services for our unsheltered folks. And we have, and will continue to have, public health concerns with pool use because of COVID. And that isn't just our community center in our city. It's across the nation. You'll see it at hotels. Pools are just not open. And I understand what you're saying. This summer, we got so many calls, people concerned about community centers, pools, parks, parking lots, boat ramps. And just to be honest and frank with you, those are just not, there's just not major priorities right now when we're dealing with this pandemic fueled recession and these other issues, and with this big blow in the budget. So I know that's not what you want to hear, but that's where we're at right now. In regards to Lake City, in regards to Aurora, what's happening for the Aurora piece is we have had the feasibility study there has been delayed due to COVID. That does not mean that it's not going to happen. And as you heard me say in my opening comments, when we do the 6-year planning cycle for the Metropolitan Park District and parks and how all those programs fit together, we will be looking at the CIP. Remind me what that stands for again. I forgot.
Capital Improvement Program.
Thank you. I don't know why I'm blanking right now. Capital improvement projects. A lot of those projects, the brick and mortar stuff that we had teed up in this time last year in budget, as you know, as the whole world knows, as this country knows, all of that is just on hold. And so that's what we're dealing with right now. So it isn't that I'm not paying attention. Parks isn't paying attention. The executive isn't paying attention. I've talked to Ben about this issue, the feasibility study, the Lake City Community Center, and they're on hold. So this isn't the only capital project or feasibility study that's on hold. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. There's one final question I think we have time for one final question on the budget before we need to continue with our town hall. So Councilmember Juarez, this question is for you as well. And this is from Rebecca. Rebecca lives in Maple Leaf, and she is wondering if you could please discuss your position on participatory budgeting and your reasoning behind that.
I am unmuted. So let me roll this back a little bit. I've had interesting discussions about participatory budgeting, what that means. In my opinion, I think we've always done that. I think we just have to do it differently. The whole budget process is supposedly participatory. Residents elect people, constituents go to their representative, they say A, B, and C, we want to see in the budget, either programs or projects to be built, whether it's streets, community centers, pools, whatever, or is it programming? Is it more just programming? Okay. So I don't really have like a radical opinion. I think participatory budgeting, if that's what we're calling it now, then yeah, we should do that. And should it be different now? Absolutely. Do we need more voices about how money is going to be spent that's not status quo? Absolutely. This city was built without participatory budgeting. That's how we got redlining. That's how we have pockets of poverty. That's how certain neighborhoods have better schools and better stuff than other neighborhoods. And all of that I can say is, maybe this is the new word now, because there wasn't quite quote unquote participatory budgeting. There was just straight up racist statutes and actions by banks and government to exclude particular groups and communities from having access to the city treasury. So if participatory budgeting means bringing in those voices to say, this is different, we want to define our values in programming, we want to define our values in brick and mortar, then absolutely. So I don't know much more to share about that. I'm not really a slogan, one-liner, t-shirt kind of person. I'm much more practical about how we get there, as long as we make those kind of sweeping changes and that we have a plan in place and we move forward. And when I say incrementally, that doesn't mean slowly. It means we march forward to that goal. So I'll get off my soapbox there. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Councilmember Juarez. And so with that, I think we can conclude the portion of this town hall dedicated specifically to the budget. So I wanted to say thank you so much, Director Noble, for being with us today.
My pleasure. And folks who are watching or listening should know that I'm available on email at ben.noble@seattle.gov and happy to field questions. It might take me a couple of days to turn them around just because of busy time. But again, ben.noble@seattle.gov. And thank you.
Dean, can I ask a question before Ben goes?
Of course.
Ben, is your slide deck on, is there a link to that, or is this the one that you shared with the general counsel?
It's customized a little bit. I will send a copy to Dean as I log off, and then you all can do with it as you choose, if you will. Yeah, that'd be great.
We will post it on the awesome D5 North Star.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All righty. And with that, we're going to transition to the second part of our town hall, which is going to be dedicated to talking about public safety here in the city of Seattle. We have the CEO of the Seattle Indian Health Board and a member of the Community Police Commission with us today, Esther Lucero. And she is joined by Ryan Gilbert, who also works for the Seattle Indian Health Board. So please, Esther and Ryan, take it away.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dean. And thank you, Councilmember Juarez. It's a real privilege to be here. I appreciate the invitation. So as you said, my name is Esther Lucero, and I'm the CEO for the Seattle Indian Health Board. I am Dene and Latina, and that's a really important component of my identity, who I am, and the people we serve. I want to speak a little bit to my position on the Community Police Commission. I was appointed by the mayor to the Community Police Commission, and I've really enjoyed and valued that collaborative work. I have to give a little disclaimer here because I cannot speak on behalf of the Community Police Commission. We actually have protocols around that. However, I can speak to some of the work that we've been doing that's already public knowledge. So just to give you some perspective on my role, I'm actually the chair of the Defund Police Committee for the CPC. I serve on the Governance Committee, Strategy Committee, Legislative Priorities Committee. And so obviously the most important piece of that work right now is the work around defund. So I will tell you, as a Community Police Commission, we recognize that we hold seats that are responsible for bringing community voices forward, particularly for us. You know, the Community Police Commission evolved out of a shooting John T. Williams and obviously other acts of violence that were experienced by Black and Indigenous communities and other communities of color. That said, we've actually heard from some of the community grassroots groups who've been really mobilizing to create change and to reallocate funds from the police department into other entities. So we've heard from Decriminalize Seattle, Casey Equity Now, and we are taking into consideration some of those recommendations. But where we are in our process is we will be voting on recommendations from the Community Police Commission, likely at our next week's meeting. And so for those folks who are listening in or watching now, our CPC meetings are Wednesdays from 9 to 1, and there are public meetings, so you're welcome to listen in on that vote and the ways that we're actually considering how to move forward with our recommendations. So today or this evening, what I'd like to do is actually share some experiences and have an honest conversation with Councilmember Juarez around what it looks like to really reconsider how we fund SPD, the roles of our police officers, the roles of community organizations and health and human service workers, and how we might rethink this. And I'm going to speak more from a perspective as a CEO of Seattle Indian Health Board, where we serve individuals who are experiencing homelessness, who have a variety of challenges like substance use disorder challenges, mental health disorder challenges, and all of these things kind of coexist into this broader public safety and public health problem we're trying to address. I've asked Ryan Gilbert to join me today as our Chief Operations Officer because he is the person who kind of is responsible for public safety on the day-to-day basis, running operations for the Seattle Indian Health Board. So I want to start off by saying that I think Councilmember Juarez, I mean, you and I have had conversations like this. And one of the things I love about working with you is that, we always work from a place of truth and have honesty in our conversations. And I think one of the things I'd like to hear a lot more of, and this is from council, this is from the mayor's office, this is even from community. I would really like us to begin to deconstruct the issues related to homelessness and housing insecurity from our true public safety needs. And I'm going to use, we have an encampment next to our organization. Seattle Indian Health Board is located at 12th and Yesler, right in the International District and right below PacMed building. And, our encampment has received a lot of attention a couple of years ago. And then more recently, the Yesler encampment received a lot of attention because of, commitment to not sweeping during the COVID crisis. So the reason I want to use this as an example is because, yes, we have some relatives there who are experiencing housing insecurity and homelessness. And then we also have folks who are really exploiting those folks. And so I'm going to ask Ryan to kind of share a little bit of what our life is like so that we can have a meaningful conversation around deconstructing that and coming up with some potential solutions. So Ryan, would you share just a little bit?
Sure. There's a lot we can talk about, and thank you, Esther, for inviting me, and thank you, Councilmember Juarez, for inviting us to talk about public safety. We're obviously in unprecedented times here, and not just for the pandemic, but also for our city's approach to public safety, and how it really feels they've outsourced it to private enterprise like the Seattle Indian Health Board. We, for the first time in our 50-year history, March 26th, Seattle Indian Health Board celebrated its 50-year anniversary. And for the first time, we've had to hire armed security guards to keep our community, our staff, our patients, and our property safe. Since we hired them, our security guards have been regularly approached by our neighbors, our community members, our staff, thanking them for their presence because police response is slow. Our guards have been handed notes from people living in the encampments telling them about pending territorial drug disputes and other potential acts of violence, and they're asking for our help. The residents of these encampments, those who are legitimately unsheltered, are being exploited, as Esther mentioned, by the criminals who have embedded themselves in their camps, adding to their strife, adding to the violence, and perpetuating the false narrative that homeless individuals are the ones who are criminals and who are dangerous to our streets. A few weeks ago, Councilmember Juarez, you may have heard that on a Monday morning, we discovered that there were 4 dead bodies on or around our property. Our security guard who discovered the one that was in our courtyard heading up to our front doors tried to resuscitate the person for 30 minutes before first responders showed up. These 4 people overdosed on drugs they likely bought just 5 feet from our property line to the south. We have staff members that have been physically assaulted and threatened with violence multiple times over the last few months. Now, imagine our frustration when we call the police to report these crimes and they tell us how we can work with our representatives to create safety for our relatives. We've been broken into 4 times. 2 of them resulted in the loss of property. Our staff have personally witnessed daily violence, drug deals, and prostitution. And let me just end with a story. A few weeks ago, on a Monday, our security guards witnessed a newer model Lexus, black Lexus, show up. 2 guys got out of the car, went to their trunk, pulled out 2 large duffel bags, walked through our property, walked through the hole in the fence on our southern side of our property, and came back a few moments later to their car empty-handed. We can only, assume what was in those duffel bags. But the more alarming piece of this was the next day that same Lexus showed up, and this time they brought 2 young girls, not much older than my youngest daughter, who's 17, just turned 17. They walked them back through our property into the encampment and left them there. They walked back to their car empty-handed, only to arrive a couple hours later to pick the girls up who were disheveled and distraught. So not only are we witnessing drug deals every day, we're witnessing the trafficking of humans, of young girls. And that's where I'll stop.
And what I want to say about this is we've been having a lot of discussions about the navigation team and navigation team's role. And I think I've been very public in advocating for a transformation in that team. And really what I believe is that police should be doing policing, and that folks who are trained to do health and human services work, social work, those types of safe interventions should be funded enough to meet the needs to serve in that way. And I'll give you an example. So, when we contacted the police and we're getting no help, and instead we're getting advocacy advice from the police, we actually did contact our council member who was able to reach out to organizations like LEAD. We were able to identify 16 individuals who qualified for those services. But it wasn't the police who reached out, and it wasn't the police who gave us support, right? And so here we are in a situation where we're actually communicating and asking for support around public safety crimes, to address the shootings and those types of things. And we're still not getting systems that are working together. And so I find that I want to see SPD be responsible for establishing more MOUs with organizations like ours who are already providing these types of services. And when we think about redirecting resources to really work with the systems that have been successful in addressing these challenges. I think that's the conversation I want to have. I'm really pleased to hear the investment in the washing stations and those types of things, but I think about other cities like New York, for example, or LA, where they actually repurpose stadiums to create, COVID safe encampments with access to wash stations, with access to healthcare, and keeping communities safe. And why is it that we're not doing those types of things? So I think I'll just pause there, and I'm looking forward to more meaningful discussion.
Thank you both for your words on the subject matter. And I think now we can perfectly segue into some questions. I've got 4 keyed up, and I'm hoping that we can ask the 2 of you a few questions as well as the council member. So to start, our first question is coming from Camille, and Camille lives in the Broadview Haller Lake neighborhood. And she asks, this is for Councilmember Juarez, are you committed to having an outside observer at the upcoming SPOG negotiations? SPOG is the labor union that represents the Seattle Police Department. If so, What will you do to ensure there is an outside observer? So Councilmember Juarez, the floor is yours.
Yes, that was from Camille, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really a good question. I hope we have another follow-up, another town hall. There's some assumptions made in that question that, and I don't want to get too wonky here, but I think we should talk about the process that we do have in place, whether we like it or not. We do have the labor relations policy committee, in which Council President Gonzalez is the chair, Councilmember Mosqueda is the vice chair, Councilmember Herbert out of District 1 is a member, Councilmember Lewis in District 7 is a member, and Councilmember Morales from District 2 is a member. I used to sit on that committee, and I stepped down, and I believe my seat went to Councilmember Mosqueda, which was fine. So let me just tell you what the process is there. That the LRPC is the 5 council members that get to meet with all of the unions to negotiate the contracts, the collective bargaining agreements, ensuring not only for the police, but for the firefighters, Seattle Public Utilities, all city employees that have unions. And as you know, collective bargaining agreements, without getting too wonky, are closed for a reason. They believe that an outsider, when you have a contract and negotiations, the people that should be in the room are the 2 people with between them negotiating what those issues are going to be. Union is there with their lawyers, city is there with their lawyers, and labor, and how these deals get worked out, these contracts get worked out. And so we have accountability partners, as you know, and as Esther Lucero shared, she's on the Community Police Commission. But we also have the Office of Professional Accountability and the Officer Inspector General, our 3 accountability partners. So I can't commit to being an outside observer, because there's a whole structure there in law, in state law, which preempts city law, protecting unions and contracts and collective bargaining agreements. And I'd be happy to talk to you more off this line. But I understand what you're getting at. I think what you're getting at is that an outside observer needs to be there. If that is something that the Community Police Commission wants to put forward in a different format through the LRPC, certainly we're all going to be available to talk about that and look at it and see what the issues are. I just don't want to get too in the weeds here, because once you start unraveling what one union gets, then the other unions, they get concerned too, because these are all collective bargaining agreements in which all the negotiations are done. These are agreed upon contracts that go beyond just some of the issues that we're hearing now. And so with that, that's probably the best answer I can give you right now.
Thank you, Councilmember Juarez. Our next question is also from Camille. And she is asking if you can discuss, or I'll just read word for word what she says. Camille asks, the mayor allocated a $100 million investment in BIPOC communities in her proposed budget. What will you do to ensure that money is invested according to community-led solutions and not a task force handpicked by the mayor, which is not truly representative of the BIPOC community in Seattle?
Okay, good. I'm glad I'm glad you brought that up. There is the Equitable Communities Initiative Task Force. I don't know about who got handpicked, but I do know that the task force itself will be inviting other members, including actually Esther Lucero is on the task force as well as Michael Tooley from United Indians. I could rattle off a bunch of people. So I understand that the task force itself will be bringing on more people that they deem should be at the table. And the task force itself will be deciding other topics besides the 4 issues that have been put forward. And obviously the task force has the authority to add more topics. The 4 topics are building opportunity and an inclusive economy, community wealth building and preserving cultural spaces, community wellness, and climate justice in the Green New Deal. So if the ultimate goal is to improve the lives of residents who've been impacted by systematic racism and oppression, then I think we're off to a good start with the people that are now on it. Now, I just recently learned that these discussions with the people that are now on it are the ones that are going to be coming together to meet. My role is just ex officio. I won't be voting. I'm hoping to be more than just an observer. I'm hoping to bring to this committee what I have spent over 3 decades doing in Indian country, and that is building economic engines and building an economic footprint that is sustainable for generations to come. So I hope to bring that experience. So we create and build economic engines, real brick and mortar, real programming that stays in those communities to enrich the lives of those people that have never had that kind of opportunity. So that's my goal, if you will. But I don't have a comment about whether or not the mayor handpicked, or I don't come at from a defensive posture that somehow it's a bad thing and the mayor handpicked people and there's this behind the scenes thing going on. I simply don't see the world that way, and I certainly don't see it this way. Maybe I'm naive, but I do know what works. I do believe that I have the experience, I know I do, where I can actually point at something. A lot of us who've worked in Indian country, Esther included, look at the success of the Seattle Indian Health Board, look at what Colleen Echohawk has done at Chief Seattle Club, look at Michael Tooley has done at United Indians, is that we can point to brick and mortar and say, we built that, we employ people, we have these jobs, and we don't just live from budget cycle to budget cycle. And right now, the strategic plan, the bullseye here is this, is homelessness, is attacking that first. And then that second ring for me is that economic sovereignty, that piece where that community owns that. And we've seen the shift where we signed over a bunch of property that should belong to the Central District. I'm thinking of the Bar Bird House and the fire station, a few other things. That's the way we should be looking at economic sovereignty in any neighborhood across the city, across this country. So I'm hoping to bring those skills. I'm very positive, but I'm not a cheerleader for the mayor, and I'm not a cheerleader for my 8 other council members. They can speak for themselves. But I can speak to what you've all heard me say many times before. I represent all of the citizens of Seattle, but I honor the needs of my district, and that's what I'll continue to do.
Councilmember Juarez, would you mind if I added to that, since I'm one of those folks?
Absolutely, I was hoping you would, thank you.
Yeah, so I was one of those folks who was invited to participate in the task force. And I want to be very clear, because this is what I'm hearing from other folks who were brought to the table. We all recognize that our responsibility is to bring as many voices forward. We also recognize that this transformation came from the social justice movements connected to Black Lives Matter, and that now we have a real opportunity to have true economic investment. And what I understand from the mayor is she's hopeful that this is not a one-time investment, that we have a long-term commitment to really addressing these inequities and racial injustice that have been experienced by these communities for a long time. And so I'll say the same thing. I'm not a pawn for the mayor. I work for our communities, and I believe in truly defining equity. And that comes from an economic position, it comes from a communication position, it comes from a position of power, and I want our communities to be empowered. And so that is my responsibility within that task force, and I can let you know that that's what I've heard from other members. And what we're trying to do right now is just organize and mobilize to make sure that we bring as many voices forward.
Thank you, Esther. Appreciate that. I want to transition into our last question. Unfortunately, we just don't have the time with the limited amount of time that we do have to ask more questions about public safety, but I did want to get your perspective, Esther, as not only the CEO of the Seattle Indian Health Board, but also as a member of the CPC and just in general being involved in this community work for as long as you have been. What do you see as the current plans? And this question, excuse me, is from Jessica, and Jessica's from Lake City. She's asking, what are the current plans for defunding the Seattle Police Department in the city's 2021 budget and reallocating that money to community? And Councilmember Juarez, I'll also give you the option to respond to the question if you choose. So Esther, take us away.
Right. Well, again, I think that's still yet to be decided. I know that there have been recommendations made, and I think that those were defined in Director Noble's presentation. I like the one that stands out is kind of the redirection of 911 calls, right? I can give you a community-based model that's grounded in Eugene, Oregon, that actually did that, where their dispatch was redirected to a pool of mental health and social work service providers to respond to those calls. Some data that proves that might be a viable avenue is that they had 24,000 calls, and of those 24,000 calls, 250 needed police support, right? And there was a significant decrease in the amount of budget that was necessary to run that function. And this is in Eugene. So it was 2.1 million a year versus $90 million a year to run that through the police. So I think that those are some of the things that we're looking at when you see a line item in Director Noble's presentation that says 911 dispatch, right? And so we could go through each of those bullets and look at different models. But I think that those are points of consideration. But I think that there's still like Decriminalize Seattle, Casey, Equity Now, those folks are still redefining their recommendations and as well. So I don't think it's fully defined at this stage. And ideally, we'll be able to still influence that.
Great. Thank you so much, Esther. Councilmember Juarez, do you have anything that you'd like to add in regards to defunding the Seattle Police Department in the 2021 budget?
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do in defunding, reducing the Seattle Police Department budget. As you know, the rebalancing budget that we passed reduced it less than 1%. As you know, it's not a secret. I just didn't think that you were going to be able to cut the police department 50% in under 6 weeks. No city in the country has done that ever. And if you notice what happened in Minneapolis, it had just collapsed. And we can read the New York Times article, read what happened. And I'm not here to say I told you so. I'm really not. What I am here to say is that we have to reduce the Seattle Police Department budget because we can no longer use the 20th century model of what a police department does and what community policing is. In the 21st century, all what we know, it has to be different. And in order for it to be different, we do have to reallocate those funds to upstream programs and initiatives that don't bring our people into this vicious river. And this is nothing new. I'm gonna pull the old auntie card here. Being a former public defender, former judge, have been doing this stuff for a long time. Remember back in the day, I know you all don't want to hear this because I also walked in the snow to school 10 miles. We didn't want a gang unit. We didn't want a K-9 unit. We didn't want the bail money that was sent. We didn't want court fines imposed. We didn't want people to be having their driver's license taken away. Those were all policies that only hurt pretty much brown and black people and poor people. So this isn't anything new to me. I just know we have new words for it. So, you know, when people were screaming, my response was, I need a plan, not a percentage. I meant that. I want a plan. And I wanted to devote 2021 to talking about how the city of Seattle becomes the first city to realistically start deconstructing and taking it down by scaffolding what the police department looks at. As Esther was saying, let the police be police and handle crime. And let our community groups like Seattle Lady Health Board, who have been successful in intervening with services, give them the money to do that because that's what they do well. And that's all I was saying. Do we need 1,400 police officers? Probably not. Do they need a $400 million budget? I don't think so. Next question is, okay, part of doing this is providing a safe space to have discussions where we don't get into the othering and the us and them or my way. I do not think people should out of hand dismiss incremental change, just as I don't think people should out of hand dismiss sweeping changes. So I think we should take advantage of this moment in time, because it's a long time coming. And those of us who have done the work for the last 30 years get it and have been around. Let's get in the room, let's roll up our sleeves, and let's talk about how we deconstruct that and do it. And I just want one last point on that. What Esther was saying, because we have to be realistic about crime. I've been hearing these jokes like, oh, there's, a shooting. Oh, send a social worker. No, that's not the way to look at this. That's not what we're saying. But if somebody's in distress, and I think I heard the thing that there were like 17,000 calls and they were all stress calls on the 911, that isn't for an armed officer to come out and do.
Right.
I don't think taking out a few programs and the NAV team and the Harbor Patrol and the horse unit, I don't think that helped defund the police. That's just me. I'll leave it at that.
Councilmember Juarez, I can speak to that from a community perspective. So, again, the NAV team, although there really needs to be some adjustment there, the impact on us, Ryan talked about the armed officers that we've had to hire to protect our people, our community, our elders, our relatives, our neighbors in the encampment. And that costs us $75,000 a month. That is near $1 million a year. And what that translates to is we serve 52 less patients per week just funding that service. And that is just to support the needs with public safety. So those sweeping changes you talk about, that responsibility then gets transferred to community, to us. And so when I think about serving 52 less people a week, I mean, we're talking like over 2,000 people a year we're going to serve less of because we can't afford to do both. And that's why we have to be methodical and thoughtful about how we do this.
Okay, well, Esther, I didn't know you were going to put me on blast like that, but since we've had this talk, so this is nothing new. I'm glad the community is hearing it. And this is why I like it when we have an exchange that's respectful with empathy, humility, and kindness, is that you're right. I don't care what you call it, NAV team, I don't care what you call it. I just know we need something. You don't burn down your house until you have another one built. I'm sorry. Right. I know it sounds great. It's a great slogan, but that's not how the real world works. So I'll leave it at that because I know we got other stuff to do, but thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Ryan, for giving us that information.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Great. Thank you so much, Esther. And like I mentioned, we just unfortunately don't have time to get to every single question, but we will be following up with you all offline. You are free to email our office, the council member, regarding your questions, and we'll be sure to get an answer. So thank you again, Esther and Ryan, for being with us today. And with that, we're going to hear from our last presenter, Director of the Human Services Department, Jason Johnson, and he's going to highlight the city's response to COVID and future designs for addressing homelessness in 2021. So Director Johnson, if you can please share your screen with the audience and begin your presentation. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Juarez and your entire team. Really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this town hall, speak with you and your constituents today on the important issue of addressing homelessness, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic. But before I do that, I really want to first just acknowledge that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is a time to highlight individuals and communities impacted by domestic violence, as well as honor the advocates, service providers, and system partners who work on the front lines and behind the scenes, driven by a focus of a community free from violence. With COVID-19 and social distancing, we've witnessed a steep increase in the number of reported domestic violence, sexual assault, and sexual exploitation incidents locally, regionally, and nationally. And it's important that we really, do everything we can to bring greater awareness to the issue of domestic violence. I think, ending gender-based violence is a priority for the city, for the mayor, for myself, and everyone at the Human Services Department, and really wanted to just take a moment to acknowledge Domestic Violence Awareness Month here in October. So hello again, good evening. My name is Jason Johnson. I have the honor of serving as Director of the Human Services Department. I'm coming to you today from Denver, Colorado, where I grew up. This is the land of the Arapaho, and it's you know, an hour later, but really glad again to have this opportunity to speak about the department's work to address homelessness. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and Dean, let me know if this is viewable.
It is, yes.
Great. I want to get it in presentation mode. Okay. Can you still see it?
Yes, we can still see it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Dean. First, I just wanted to state that the Human Services Department is the single largest contributor to Seattle's social safety net, investing millions of dollars in support of vulnerable populations and communities across Seattle. HSD touches many bodies of work, including aging and disability services, youth and family empowerment, a new community safety division. As I mentioned, we work hard to address domestic violence. And most prominently, we are the agency in the city primarily responsible for addressing homelessness citywide. In any normal year, this work is tough to measure, given the growing and complex needs of vulnerable communities who are experiencing homelessness. But when you add in a global pandemic, it takes that work and makes it much more complicated, but so much more critical. Homelessness in particular has been a huge area of need during the pandemic. Many of our go-to homeless services and shelter providers, their shelters were all of a sudden unsafe, with people sleeping just inches apart, sometimes head to head or head to toe, with service providers and businesses halted services, putting a strain on other parts of the homeless response system and Seattle as a whole. And HSD has led the city's COVID-19 efforts in the homeless space in partnership with King County Department of Community and Human Services, as well as our public health partners. We stood up a number of de-intensifying shelters, so relocating people so that they could have at least 6 feet from one another when staying in congregate shelters to help control the spread of COVID among shelter clients. We also did a lot to make our contracts much more flexible, much more nimble, so that individuals could be served in single rooms through hotels. And this all helped prevent a large-scale outbreak of COVID in the very vulnerable population experiencing unsheltered homelessness across our city. We also focused street outreach to try to get people the help they need. We used the navigation team as well as community-based outreach providers to help distribute needed supplies. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the work using broad strokes. But today what I wanted to do is go into a little bit more of the budget detail, both what we are doing to combat COVID in 2020, but mostly I wanted to focus on the work ahead in 2021 and work that is part of the mayor's proposed 2021 budget. So speaking of that budget, I wanted to include this slide. This is the investments across the city that the Human Services Department manages, but this is not exclusively HSD funding captured here. But what you can see is that captured in red really starting this year and continuing next year, we are going to see a substantial amount of increased investment in order to support people experiencing homelessness during the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll also note that in a budget year where many department budgets are being reduced, you'll see that the investments and level of support to support our efforts to address homelessness citywide are remaining stable. So we're not seeing a reduction in those funds out of our general fund or other funds, but instead seeing a pretty substantial increase in the amount of funding that will go to addressing homelessness. And quite literally, with these emergency funds, we will more than double what we invested just 3 years ago to address homelessness across the city. So as I mentioned kind of in my opening remarks, COVID really drastically changed our focus in 2020. We invested $41.3 million in our homeless response network just this year in 2020 to make sure that programs met the public health and CDC guidelines and were in place to continue functioning, but to function in a way that reduced the spread of COVID-19. With $38.3 million in one-time funding, we were able to focus on reducing the spread of COVID-19 among our shelter network. We were able to open almost 100 new units of shelter and relocate just over 350 beds to de-intensify shelter spaces in congregate shelter programs. This money also helped us just maintain shelter services and contract flexibility. I mentioned our partnership with King County, DCHS, and Public Health. In partnership, the three agencies have been able to safely shelter individuals in vacant hotel rooms and continue to pay for the services that those individuals needed during those hotel stays. We've been able to help service providers create safe spaces and maintain changes through the pandemic. We've also been able to increase homeless prevention and rental assistance investments this year. $3 million is allocated to the department from the CARES Act, and that is new ESG dollars or essential solutions grant from the federal government that we're going to be using here in the fourth quarter to stand up new shelter capacity and some additional hotel rooms. These are expected to be online by the end of 2020. The city is looking at several properties that could host a shelter, and we'll be using this $3 million investment to support that work. I think it's critical to continue to support agencies in sustaining these changes in 2021. We've done a lot in 2020, and again, I think that the impact of these investments, the impact of these program changes, we've really seen a slow or reduction in the rate of positive cases of COVID-19. And so we need to keep these efforts going in 2021. So speaking of 2021, what you'll see on this slide is a continuation and added investment to support some of the things that we started in 2020 that we need to maintain. We also acknowledge that with thousands of people living unsheltered in the city of Seattle, we need to create additional capacity. We need more safe spaces for those individuals to go. And shelter is not enough. We also need to make sure people are moving through that shelter system and into permanent housing. Housing is the only solution to homelessness, and we need to make sure that we are ever focused on creating as many resources on the housing side so that people experiencing unsheltered homelessness now have a path to those new housing units. So what you'll see here is that we are in the mayor's proposed budget, $13.9 million in emergency dollars will be focused on maintaining shelter capacity, sustaining the de-intensification shelter efforts made in response to COVID-19, but also, again, increasing and continuing investments in eviction prevention through rental assistance. This is critically important. We know that there's a eviction moratorium and some rental supports to keep people from falling into hopelessness, and we need to keep those efforts going. We want to, and highlighted through the mayor's 2021 budget, we want to bring at least 300 hotel units online so that we can get people indoors, and get people indoors in a safe way where they have their own room, their own bathroom, running water, access to meals, and access to services. We also plan on opening a new enhanced shelter. Enhanced shelter is a 24/7 facility where individuals can go and stay and have space for storing their belongings. They can enter those facilities even if they're in a partnership. So the enhanced shelter, what is critically different about enhanced shelter that doesn't exist in basic shelter is that there are housing navigation services on site. And so day one that someone enters, there's a conversation about how to get those individuals through into housing. And speaking of housing, the 2021 budget allocates $8.9 million for rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is a temporary rent voucher. This voucher offers an individual full payment of their rent for up to a year. It also comes with some case management services that those individuals re-entering the housing market might need in order to maintain that housing. We've seen that rapid rehousing is incredibly successful. Looking out a year after, 6 months and a year after the rental subsidy ends, we see over 80% of individuals who used a rapid rehousing voucher are still housed. So it's an effective tool to permanently addressing someone's instance of homelessness. We also want to invest more in diversion. And in the mayor's budget, we have money to serve around 130 households in diversion services. This is flexible cash assistance. And so it could be cash assistance used to pay someone's first and last month's rent, maybe a deposit. It is something that if they have housing and maybe job and social supports in a home community, we can get them back there. This is really flexible spending that outreach workers, shelter workers can use to be really creative with individuals that they're case managing in shelter and allow those individuals to get a placement into housing. And then finally, really excited about the Office of Housing and their work to stand up more permanent supportive housing. So this year, in 2021, the city will be bringing on 600 units of permanent supportive housing. And that housing is desperately needed. Permanent supportive housing is a program that not just offers permanent housing, but has services attached. So this is incredibly important program that serves a chronic population who will likely have service needs for the entirety of their life. Also wanted to talk a little bit about outreach. So we are in the mayor's 2021 proposed budget. There is sustained and some increased funding to support outreach efforts throughout the city. The navigation team has often gets a lot of attention. We are making changes to that team. The Human Services Department and through this budget, the mayor is supporting a real change to this team and their focus. The focus of the Unsheltered Outreach Response Team, and you'll see $1.3 million is allocated in the mayor's 2021 budget to support this team, will really be a centralized point of coordination between community partners, who provide on the street outreach. These are agencies like Youth Care, DESC, REACH, Seattle Indian Health Board, Chief Seattle Club, who will be able to have a team that can provide a level of support to them as they're conducting their work. And so there is a team that can coordinate sort of when and where outreach is needed. It is a team that can make sure that outreach workers, while out in the field, can have access to the resources they need. If they are engaged with someone and that person says yes to shelter, we need to be doing everything we can to support that outreach worker's ability to get that person inside. And so this will be a team that will be managing the diversion resources, the new shelters that we're bringing online, and making sure that those resources, which once were only available to the navigation team, will now be made available to community-based outreach providers. And you'll see that in the mayor's proposed 2021 budget, there is $9.4 million allocated to support community-based outreach. These are city-funded community agencies that provide outreach to people who are living unsheltered. We have a number of contracts currently, and you'll see those agencies listed here. And we want to make sure that they have an increased level of support, an increased level of coordination, that they have full access to the resources they need as they engage with individuals. And I think this 8-person team inside of the Human Services Department, without any formal relationship to Seattle Police Department, is well poised to offer that level of support. So I'm going to stop there. I know I went through a lot of information very quickly, but wanted to just provide kind of a quick overview. I offered a lot more detail about the department's investments in addressing homelessness, both in 2020 and in 2021 at council meeting just a couple weeks ago. And so if you go to Councilmember Juarez's webpage, I'm sure it can direct you to the homelessness budget presentation for a lot more detail about what's in the mayor's proposed budget. But thanks again, really appreciate the time to be with you and happy to help answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Yes, everyone watching this town hall, we will follow up in our office to make sure that any materials presented during this town hall are sent to you so you can peruse them at your leisure. Moving forward, we've got a few questions from folks regarding your presentation. So Director Johnson, the first one comes from Mary in Maple Leaf. And she asks, now that the City Council has removed the navigation team, what planning was done to replace this one in an attempt to deal with homelessness in the neighborhoods? And what is planned to replace the navigation team? The navigation teams were attempting to assist homeless neighbors with placement in housing, providing medical and mental health services and social services. So Director Johnson, could you elaborate a little bit more on where you see, now that the navigation team has been disbanded, what is the stopgap for those services?
Thank you, really good question. And as I mentioned in my last slide, and I'll go back there for a moment if this will let me, yep. So we have contracts with a number of organizations that are listed here on this slide that conduct street outreach every day throughout the city. I'm thankful for Councilmember Juarez and Councilmember Peterson's support of the navigation team in their work. We had to pretty abruptly figure out what we were going to do to continue to support what the team was working on in several encampments throughout the city, in parks, in construction zones, in areas that were obstructed. And so we are really have entered into what I believe is a really promising partnership with these community-based organizations. I believe that the city has a role to play. The city has a responsibility and is held accountable for making sure that we are a city that is safe, both from crime, but also from public health concerns. And we also have a responsibility and accountability to individuals that are living unsheltered in these encampments. And so I think that the city, specifically the Human Services Department, is in a really good position to help continue to support these community-based organizations, but do so in a way that coordinates the effort, facilitates the effort, and defines sort of, when and how these community-based organizations are engaged with encampments. So we are doing that planning right now. Navigation team operations have ceased. They are no longer out in the field. But we are working in close partnership with these community-based organizations to figure out what better system can be in place in 2021.
Thank you, Director Johnson. Another question came in from Al, and Al lives in the Lake City neighborhood. And this is a question that I've heard frequently in my 2 years of working for Councilmember Juarez, which is why not set up FEMA type tents on city property with locations throughout the city and relocate homeless encampments to those locations?
Yeah, it is a really good question. And I think that I know I in the department have been part of multiple efforts to increase the number of shelter spaces available throughout the city. There are, just in response to COVID, we have been able to relocate a number of individuals who are living in tight quarters in congregate shelter settings, but also in partnership with King County, very quickly stand up isolation quarantine facilities throughout the county, and through the use of hotel rooms, get people into safer spaces. We've also had to really shift the way that we were offering services to individuals who are experiencing homelessness. But this idea of sort of, placing mass tents somewhere and inviting people into those locations is something that you cannot do without substantial investment, without service providers who can manage the population that may or may not choose to go in there. We are really trying to do everything we can to stand up these enhanced shelters where people have access to the services they need and can be put on a path to housing. And so I know it seems as easy as, opening up a large hangar or popping up a tent in a city park and problem solved, but it really is much more complicated than that. It is much more expensive than that, and really takes a significant amount of work to pull that kind of effort off. The last thing I would say is that it also requires a really a strong partnership from our community-based organizations who right now are absolutely stretched. They are doing incredible work day and night, 24/7. I'm really mindful of the capacity that these overworked and underpaid individuals who work in shelters, who work in food banks, who work out on the street doing outreach, and to make an ask of them to rapidly support efforts, additional efforts other than the ones that they're supporting now, to support the over 2,000 shelter units that we have in place across King County, is a lot to ask. And so there's also just a service provision capacity issue at play.
Thank you. Our next question is from Tia from Lake City. And this one is directed specifically for Councilmember Juarez. And Tia asks, what will be done to facilitate meaningful change to the Lake City neighborhood and the Thornton Creek watershed to address the ever-growing homeless population? Will the citizens of the area be able to enjoy these outdoor spaces anytime soon? Can you address the true problem of rampant drug use and crime as opposed to masking this as an affordable housing issue? So Councilmember Juarez, I would love for if you were able to answer a question from Tia from the Lake City neighborhood.
Thank you. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to take a little bit issue with, I don't believe that we are masking the true problem of rampant drug use and crime as opposed to masking this as an affordable housing issue. I don't subscribe to that fact within the question. I know I'm sounding like a lawyer there, but what I will say is this. The roots of addiction and disease and poverty, all of those issues, are run deep, far and wide, and are incredibly complex as they are sad. Government doesn't fix everything. It just doesn't. I wish I could say that. It doesn't. But what I do know is that we have to address and continue to address the issue of homelessness with humanity and empathy and real solutions. And like Jason is saying, it isn't a matter of putting these people in tents out on some piece of property. You can't do that. That's inhumane. At the same time, you can't leave people in inhumane conditions living on 125th and Lake City Way. We've been out there. We've been to Albert Davis Park. So we get that. So what we try to balance is that we have to build housing units. That just that, put that aside for a minute. There's many things we have to address to get there, and we have to work together with community and the city departments. We have to have welcoming neighborhoods. When we put in the tiny house village up on Aurora and 88th and Nesbitt and worked with community to put it there, make it low barrier, a lot of things went on, but we got it done. You need a welcoming neighborhood. And as you know, a lot of people say, yes, that's great, but not in my neighborhood. We need to work together, not only with the city departments, but what you heard Jason saying and Esther saying is the community service providers, that we all know what we're doing. Parks, HSD, Seattle Public Utilities, Seattle City Lights, and my discussions with the new captain of the North Precinct share that as well as, okay, we need to be coordinating with community organizations, city departments, who's doing what now? I don't want to live in the past about the politics or the politicizing about the NAV team, it's gone. But I do want to look forward and how we provide those same services where we protect and we shelter the unsheltered, but we also recognize that there are vulnerable people, like Esther was saying, that are living in these encampments and some criminal activity who are also being taken advantage of. And I've always been in the position of this. If somebody is selling drugs out of a tent, they should be arrested. If someone is selling drugs out of their house in Laurelhurst, they should be arrested. I don't subscribe to this notion that if people don't agree with me, that somehow I'm criminalizing homelessness. Because at some point, people are responsible for their actions. When we cleared out the 27 tents that were on the Cloverleaf up at Starbucks, up by McDonald's, I think one of the sobering facts for us at the time were those 27 tents, nobody took our services. When we cleared out tents behind the Starbucks on Lake City Way, I think 2 people took the services. Now, I'm not saying that's everybody, but that's the condition that we live with. It's the human condition. So the question that you ask government isn't going to fix all of this. And I know I don't want to kick the can down the road, but I really want to be honest about this. November 3rd can't come soon enough. And when you live in a state where the federal government has turned off the spigot, I don't care how many homeless proclamations you make that it's, public concern, or we're going to do this in 5 years or 10 years. If you don't have the partnership of the federal government giving money to the state, to the county, to the city to address it, we're not going to get to it. And we also need the 38 cities in King County to work with us, because we've learned that over 50% of the homeless are not from Seattle. It may be more visible because it's the city, because we have services, but we need the other 38 cities, 37 cities, whatever. We need them to pitch in too, because the homeless people living, and Jason can help me out on this a little bit, the people living here aren't all from Seattle. They're from Tacoma, they're from Bothell, they're from Kenmore, they're from Everett, they're from Tacoma, they're from Fife, they're from, and so when other cities point to us, I used to sit on the King County Board of Health and dealing with the homelessness issues when we had the Hep A breakout. Some of the cities would point and say, well, it's Seattle's problem. Well, that's a Seattle issue. No, it's not. These are your brothers, sisters, cousins, friends, neighbors. And not everybody who is homeless is a criminal. And not everybody who's homeless is addicted. And we have to parse out with government funds how we take care of those people, how we shelter those people, how we stabilize those people. So I can't agree with, I think it's a good question, and I'm glad you're giving me an opportunity to be this candid and this vulnerable at what we can and can't do. But we are doing our best. We want to do more. We're hoping that we can come together in this new budget cycle and address not only, you heard Jason say it, I said it as well, how much housing stock we're increasing, finding those welcoming neighborhoods, working with city departments and working with community-based organizations to provide intervention and services to get people sheltered and stabilized. And we have some phenomenal groups, and I can list a ton of them, but the ones that come to mind just in the North End is North Helpline, what Kelly Brown's doing, Aurora Commons, what Elizabeth Dahl is doing, God's Little Acre, Pastor Melanie and John, and what they're doing with the Mennonite folks. Building Lake City Together, and I could just rattle off a bunch more groups. Those of you that are not happy when you see that, I'm just going to say this, I'm sure some people are going to get angry. It would be nice if you helped us work with you. Is there a way that we can get together and talk about how we can try to clean up the North Fork of Thornton Creek and the South Fork? Because I walk by the creek, I live near it, and I see what goes on. Every time we clean that encampment up and clean up the signs and get parks out there, it literally takes 2 or 3 weeks and it's back again. So I would be lying to you as an elected official if I said, we're going to go out there this week and we're going to clean it up and government's going to fix it and there'll never be a homeless person there again. That's not going to happen. But what will happen is that we stay committed to doing the work. It's kind of like, I said this analogy before, as someone who's had cancer a few times. Do we want a cure for cancer? Yeah. Do we have one? No. Are we going to give up trying to find one? Never. And that's how I feel about homelessness. I'll leave it at that. If Jason, you want to add anything to that?
Councilmember Juarez, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you bringing up the regional nature of this. The department, the mayor, council, and our county colleagues, our Sound Cities Association colleagues are all working right now to stand up a regional authority to address homelessness. And until we start addressing this issue as a region together, as equal partners and equal contributors to that safety net, we will not have a solution. Seattle cannot end homelessness on its own. We have strong partnerships with King County. They have additional funding sources, whether they come from the state or the federal government, or our county generated funds to help support efforts in Seattle. But until we truly come together as a region, this issue is going to continue to be a substantial problem. So really just want to, thank you for the time. Thanks for letting me participate in the town hall. But thank you again for championing regionalism on this issue. It's needed, it's required. And I think we're on a path to having better regional partnerships than we have in place now.
Yeah, let me just add one comment to that. Jason, I'm glad, and I say this in all, with a straight face and all due respect to everybody out there listening. if we can have sound transit that attacks transportation and recognizes it as a regional issue, 3 counties, people need that rich transportation spine. If we can attack public health, like the King County Board of Health, that's King County. That's a county approach to public health. Then we should be able to address homelessness, which is not going away in a county, from a county perspective, in a county resources. I just don't think that the King County Regional Homeless Authority, we have phenomenal leadership on there. We have Council President Gonzalez, and we have Council Member Andrew Lewis. And, I helped put that together when I was on that board. I stepped down, but I helped put it together. And we have to start thinking that way, that it isn't just us. And all the people here are really all of our neighbors. And I can't stress that anymore. So, if you have friends and family and no electeds in the other cities that are surrounding us in King County, I'd ask you to have them really take a laboring oar in helping us address homelessness. And I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both. Thank you, Director Johnson, for being here with us today. And with that, I think we will conclude the question and answer period of this town hall. It has been such a pleasure. This is our first town hall of Councilmember Juarez's, and we look forward to doing many more in the future. So with that in mind, I will pass it over to Councilmember Juarez for some final closing remarks.
Thank you. That was Dean. Dean Alsop, as you all know, is our district director, and he's been doing a great job. I just want to end it on this note. Actually, we had another community meeting with Lake Sadie Neighborhood Alliance. They did a really good Zoom call, and we got on that. And I want to be, I'm hoping that we have more. And I'm hoping that we provide a space where people are respected and we can actually have discussion. As my Uncle Billy used to say before every meeting, you come in there with an open mind and open heart so we can hear everybody. And that's kind of who I am and what I believe leadership is. So with that, let me read what Dean has written, what I'm supposed to say to you guys. So if you're interested in learning more about my strategy for the 2021 budget and these other salient topics, please subscribe to my newsletter. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. That is the North Star, which you can do so by visiting Seattle Council's website. You could always email my office at Debora.Juarez@seattle.gov. I want to thank you for your interest in the city budget. I'd like to thank Director Ben Noble, Esther Lucero, and Director Johnson for joining us. Thank you to our IT professionals. Oh, they're so good. Trust me, it was a lot of work. They're great at helping us. For their support behind the scenes, and our comm staff, Dana, and for working to put this together. Let's see. I'm supposed to tell you to have a great evening. And let's see. Oh, yes. Vote. Ballots have been mailed. Please vote. So with that, hopefully I'll see you again in a couple more weeks. Thank you. Go Kraken.